Kicking off at number 5, SCP-280. And when we're talking about monsters, what better way to begin than with a little anomalous humanoid smoke monster whose corporeal form appears out of thin air to wreak havoc just for the sake of it. Thankfully for us though, all it takes is a good old-fashioned flashlight to subdue this creature and shine the light on its all-encompassing evil to banish it back to whence it came. But if you don't have a flashlight or any other manner of illumination, holy moly, you're in for a pretty terrible time. As the record states, SCP-280 is a black human-shaped mass with 2 large white eyes where its head should be, and 2 hands with very long and very thin fingers. When we talk about just straight up shadow monsters, some of the themes encapsulated in the SCP Foundation are pretty few and far between actually. But what is so remarkable and terrifying here is that SCP-280 is literally the monster that may or may not be lurking in your closet or under your bed at night. It harkens on that theme of hiding under a sheet with a flashlight in the dead of night, just this time it doesn't care about your feelings and it will kill you. You see, SCP-280 appears to be wholly composed of matter that can gain or lose its corporeal form. The matter itself is incredibly black, almost Vanta black, and resembles smoke as it dissipates in and out of existence. When in its vicinity, SCP-280 will slowly move toward any human beings and attempt to attack them. In fact, SCP-280 appears to sense human life from wherever it is, and no limit has yet been found on this ability. And once it finds its prey, it will use its hands to pull and tear at the subject's body, resulting in massive physical trauma, always resulting in a vile and gruesome death. 280 does not eat, breathe, or sleep. It does not ingest any of the tissue of its victims or appear to have any other use for its murderous ways. It kills, then it disappears in a puff of smoke, and it is literally the worst possible thing you could ever imagine at a slumber party. Bring a flashlight. Swinging in at number 4, the Diva. And it's no secret that over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, we love ourselves some ancient civilizations and long buried mysteries of time forgotten. It just goes without saying really, and if that's the particular flavour that you're looking for here, then look no further than this report on a horrifying, cannibalistic, theocratic civilization, the Diva, otherwise known as SCP-140, which thankfully for us, isn't exactly a monster per se, but instead a book about a monstrous civilization that also desires to return to our world if it had the chance to. You see, SCP-140 manages to portray so many horrifying creatures and creations that if they ever were real, then we'd probably need an entire other foundation just to contain them. So let's count our lucky stars that they're not real, right? And instead it's just some haunted, cursed book passed from curious historian to curious historian, who are then driven mad by the ancient blood magic bound by the ink. Oh yeah, forgot to mention that point. As the record states, SCP-140 is a hard copy book with an unremarkable black binding and an unknown number of white pages. It is titled A Chronicle of the Divas, and readers admit to feelings of paranoia, unease and nausea whilst they're reading it, but are also compelled to keep reading by some anomalous curiosity. The book itself details an ancient civilization referred to as the Divas, who originated in what is now south-central Siberia, a civilization that demonstrated fierce militarism, conquest, ancestor worship, and most importantly, gruesome human sacrifice. Throughout their reign, through efficacious thaumaturgic rituals, the Divites produced a wide variety of horrifying relics and creatures, many of which bear a startling resemblance to several other SCP entries. Essentially, although it's purposely left ambiguous, 140 are potentially the anomalous creators of many SCP entities, some cannibalistic civilization of monstrosities that ushered in an age of pure and terrifying evil. Thankfully for us, it's just a book, right? Next up at number 3, SCP-1461. And who needs just one single monster when you can have an entire English manor full to the brim with them? Well, 57 of them to be precise. The sole inhabitants of the House of the Worm that would make any horror movie wince at the thought of roaming through its decrepit corridors in fear of being cannibalized by these poor helpless machine men souls of sorts. Yeah, the basic premise for SCP-1461 is pretty damn harrowing actually. Essentially, as the record states, 1461 is an English manor built roughly around the year 1890 that came to the attention of the Foundation back in November of 1941 after the dwelling and its sub-level facilities just vanished out of thin air. However, after an 11-day period of its absence, it rematerialized back into the world, although as you may imagine, it was changed somewhat. You see, as the Foundation discovered, the manor was owned by an undisclosed World War I veteran who, after being injured during the Battle of the Somme, returned back to England with an incredibly nihilistic view of society. There, essentially, he went mad and he reorganized his staff members into a bizarre cult that worshipped a creature known only as the Worm. And yeah, it gets worse, because as the record continues to reveal, in the confines of the manor, SCP-1461 contains approximately 57 humanoid entities, which through an unknown process have been augmented with a series of crude mechanical implants of an otherwise unknown origin. Each of them have been uniquely augmented with metallic teeth and claw-like protrusions from their hands, giving them lethal close-quarters combat abilities. The majority of them have reinforced spinal columns, and nearly all of them have had their organs replaced with prosthetic equivalents. As you may imagine, they appear to possess little to no higher brain function or even retain any sense of their self, and instead they act entirely on canine levels of instinct and intellect. Within the confines of the manor, they build easily hidden and defensible nests and spend their time roaming the anomalous corridors, hunting for scraps of food or even cannibalizing the flesh remaining on the other 56 of their counterparts. And not only that, but it's also theorized that the house itself is controlling them through some anomalous means, and yeah, as if SCP-1461 wasn't already terrifying enough. Coming in at number 2, SCP-701. And of course, what better way to combine our shared passions for the horror form than to highlight the SCP Foundation's own version of a pretty iconic anomaly in its own right. Essentially, to cut a long story even shorter, SCP-701 is the Foundation's version of the Yellow King, but in classic SCP Foundation manner, this one is equally terrifying in its own right. Let me introduce you to the Hanged King, the last thing you ever want to see if you somehow find yourself watching an anomalous theatre production. Yeah, the brilliance behind this Foundation entry is that it takes the essence of fear that was laid out in Robert W. Chambers' remarkable cosmic horror novella The King in Yellow and brings with it a facelift of a much more physical kind. Also, the Foundation's version, the Hanged King, is just freaking creepy. So yeah, there's that too. As the record states, SCP-701, aka the Hanged King's Tragedy, is a Caroline-era revenge tragedy performed in 5 acts. However, as is the case with many things SCP Foundation, all is not as it may seem, and performances of the play are associated with a sudden psychotic and suicidal behaviour amongst both observers and participants of the play, resulting in the manifestation of a mysterious figure classified as SCP-701-1, aka the Hanged King. And since the play's creation over 300 years ago, 701 has claimed the lives of thousands of individuals. However, not all performances of the play end with an outbreak, and only around 36% of performances have actually ended with SCP-701 events. You see, as it appears most commonly, the Hanged King will emerge during the banquet scene of Act 5, where the cast then will either murder each other or commit suicide, where afterward rioting will break out in the audience, tearing each other to shreds, and any survivors of this event will then be permanently comatose or psychotic. As you may imagine, the Foundation has gone to great lengths in destroying all known copies of the Hanged King's Tragedy, and yet still curious playwrights across the ages seem anomalously drawn to it. Yeah, not gonna lie, but this one is one of my favourite SCP entries of all time. So in that case, give it a read. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the Varsna of Savi. And talking of my favourite SCP entry of all time, this one is exactly that. Really, although this is a case study and part of a wider grouping of texts in the Foundation known as the Sarkic Cult, the Varsna of Savi are my favourite all-time entry of the SCP Foundation, and I would implore anyone that hasn't yet taken a look at it to read it, because if it's anomalous ancient practices you're looking for, steeped on top of some remarkably well-written fictional anthropology, combined with a surreal and bizarre depiction of a cult of people that would make both The Wicker Man and Midsummer blush, then please read this entry. If you know anything about the wider canon of the Foundation, then you'll know that there are 2 groups of ancient religions known as the Sarkics and the Mechanites that have been at war for time forgotten. Also, side note, read about them too if you haven't, because they're equally complex and terrifying. One facet of the former religion though with the Sarkics is that they're obsessed with bioorganic matter, otherwise known as the flesh. Some of them are entirely evil, hell-bent on homogenizing organic matter into one single pile of nothingness, but a particular tribe of them, otherwise known as the Varsna of Savi, are completely different. Now, I can't really do this piece of literature justice in such a small segment, but the matter of fact and incredible attention to detail in this document exemplifies exactly what is so compelling about the SCP Foundation as a writing project. As it states, the Varsna of Savi are a group of indigenous Finno-Ugric people that inhabit the Arctic area of Sapmi, a region which encompasses northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula of Russia. Now, at first glance, these Varsa are no different to the local Sami people, but when you peer closer, holy moly, these guys are an entirely different type of curious. The thing is, what the Varsa seem to exemplify is taking the horror concept of using human flesh as a vessel for inspiring fear, but then somehow it makes it convincing, which is a really weird feeling. Honestly, this case study is so damn convincing that you'll find yourself drawn to an indigenous group of people that worship flesh so much so that they construct entire buildings out of it. And after reading it, strangely enough, you may want to join them. It's like the ending of Midsummer, just with more reason. I don't know. It's weird, but it's brilliant. Read it.
Coming in at number 5, SCP-054-FR. 054-FR is a phenomenon occurring in some waves off the western coasts as well as some eastern coasts. It is characterized by the physical transformation of effective waves to resemble the jaws of a great white shark. This SCP is capable of remaining unnoticed until it is almost too late to act. It is capable of forming on waves at least 4 meters tall, but the maximum height of which it can reach is unknown. Effective waves are capable of rolling at 3 times the speed of non-effective waves if a non-aquatic animal of a human being is situated between SCP-054 and the closest coast. Appearances of this SCP are growing considerably if the previously evoked individuals are situated at a distance of at least 250 meters from the coast, whether they are swimmers, divers, or aquatic vehicles of moderate size, with the most common victims having been surfers. Injuries caused by SCP-054 are similar to that which could be accomplished by a great white shark, but with the pressure being directly proportional to the height of the effective wave. Injuries in 68% of cases occur during the collapse of the wave over the victim. Reported injuries have been as simple as a removed limb to total disappearance of the victim. The only method of avoiding injury is to dive under the wave before impact. An exclusion zone has been established around all shorelines where an occurrence of SCP-054-FR have been observed. Only personnel with a clearance level of 3 or higher may enter the containment zones, and only for experimental purposes. Access is forbidden to any and all civilians under the pretext of conducting research on a population of marine animals. Sneaky stuff, this is why I don't go in the ocean, ever. There's something look.
Swinging in at number 4, SCP-354. And similar to many of our other entries on the previous part 1 of this list, SCP-354 is a bit of a monstrous anomaly in the sense that it isn't just pertinent to one monster, but a whole host of them. Well, potentially anyway, because really, no one truly knows the full extent of this particular entry. As the record states, 354 is a pool of red liquid discovered in the polar areas of northern Canada. The liquid in question is that of a consistency similar to that of human blood, hence the colloquial name in the Foundation of Blood Pond. Now, that's a death metal band if I've ever heard one. You see, despite its nomenclature, SCP-354 is explicitly not of any sort of biological nature. In fact, the pool does not have any definitive banks, and it appears that the soil of the area mixes with the liquid until at a certain given point there is just no more soil and the liquid and ground become mostly solid. The deeper the pool goes, the denser the liquid becomes, and if SCP-354 has a bottom, it has yet to be reached. And here's the real kicker, and here's the reason it deserves our monstrous attention. You see, periodically a number of entities have emerged from the pool, extremely hostile and incredibly dangerous, that have attempted to escape from the enclosure. These have varied from a giant bat, a bear-sized mammalian creature covered in razor-sharp spines that was virtually bulletproof and had to be vaporized via napalm. SCP-354 have spat out humanoid reptiles, giant tentacular sea creatures, feline creatures made out of both pure magma and solid ice, even what appeared to be a metallic humanoid that resembled the Terminator. Really, the extent of SCP-354 is kind of staggering, and the actual concept of its anomalous design is incredibly intriguing when we relate it to several other entries that appear to function in a similar manner, actually. Essentially, it's a pool of blood in the high Arctic of northern Canada that seems to spit out the most terrifying entities that you could ever imagine, and well, no one knows why. Yeah. This one is a particular favourite of mine. Next up at number 3, SCP-1730. And talking of favourites, this one kind of takes the cake when it comes to anomalous locations that appear to spit out all manners of horrifying entities. Have you ever heard the phrase, "what happened to Site-13"? Well, that's because it's one of the most elaborate cover-ups that has ever occurred in the Foundation's history, and as the darkest stain on its even darker track record, you'll certainly understand that that is kind of saying something. It's no secret that the Foundation is hella messed up. They know that, we know that, and yet they still want to cover this particular entry up. You see, whilst there is far more to it, first let's give it the exposure that it deserves. As the record states, SCP-1730 is a large complex of structures 15 kilometers of the US-Mexico border, located within the Big Bend Ranch State Park, discovered by the Foundation on June 5th of an undisclosed year. Due to the isolated nature of the complex and the low survival rate of individuals that come into contact with it, it is unknown how long the site has laid abandoned and undiscovered before it was brought to life. And you might be thinking, hang on, how could the SCP Foundation have a site that it didn't even know about? And well, here's where things get timey-wimey, because SCP-1730 is actually from an alternate dimension where the SCP Foundation is the embodiment of all evil instead of the grey administrators that we know them to be. You see, in this parallel universe, instead of safely containing the anomalies that the Foundation secure, their staff and researchers brutally torture and experiment on them before dissolving them into an anomalous toxic black sludge referred to as the body pit. If you think D-class personnel are treated badly in our universe, then, well, put it this way. In this parallel universe, their doctors don't even have names, just ID numbers. You see, Site-13 was originally overseen by a psychopath named Elliot Emerson, but you see, all of these terrifying creatures that were spawned from these vile experiments, eventually they revolted against this human overlord, and well, the lunatics had taken over the asylum, put it that way. And if that wasn't enough, Site-13 just so happened to appear in our universe through anomalous means, and yeah, if you want to know what happened there, please dare to read some of the exploration logs in this entry, because that is a horror story that you need to check out. Coming in at number 2, SCP-400. Alright, on the topic of monsters, let's get back to the true meaning of the theme and forget about corporeal smoke murderers and red pools of death for a moment, and imagine, if you will, one of the most vile and disgusting creatures in the entirety of the SCP Foundation. While actually by creatures, what I actually mean is an entire species of them, and by them I mean bugs. And gross bugs too. And I will forewarn you, this is possibly one of the most disturbing SCP entries in the entirety of the Foundation, and if you are a mother, I would highly recommend skipping the nightmare fuel that is about to ensue. Honestly, I'm not exaggerating, this is one of the most messed up entries in the entire Foundation. Okay, let's see what we can do. As the record states, SCP-400 is the collective designation for an anomalous species of arthropod that vaguely resembles the common pillbug. Whilst individually they are similar, they can be distinguished from the pillbug by the bright red striping patterns on their dorsal carapace. So what's the big deal? Bugs, right? Well, collectively SCP-400 is a parasitic organism which feeds on human mammary secretions. Human breast milk. SCP-400 feeds on human breast milk, and how does it get that? Jeez guys, SCP-400 are anomalously attracted toward infants that then burrow into them as they sleep and use the infant as their host, essentially becoming an active colony. During a 12-week period, the active colony then anomalously tracks the mother of the infant, and through their horrific design, they lull the mother into an almost catatonic zombified state, only able to care for the infested infant by breastfeeding it, and then they use the affected mother as another host for them to continue their vile and abominable life cycle. I'm going to stop there, because really there is much more to this particular entry, and it's one of the most difficult SCPs that I've read. If you dare, take a look at SCP-400, because whilst being entirely repulsive and horrific and just so damn terrifying and disgusting, it's also one of the most original horror concepts that I've seen in a while. So yeah, SCP-400 everybody, no thank you. And finally coming in at our number 1 spot, Taboo. Because while certainly SCP-400 takes the cake in pure gross outness, this particular entry, known as 4000 issue, or more colloquially simply Taboo, as so far as the actual horror creation behind it, this one is perhaps the most well-conceived entry in the entire Foundation. And also, it's going to make things a little difficult to explain, because in the head canon of this entry, essentially it cannot be described under threat of unleashing one of the most powerful key-to-class anomalies known to the SCP Foundation, and so it goes to great lengths in outlining the ambiguity of its potential consequences. But yeah, that's not going to stop us. Now let's see if I can remember my issue class training again. Oh yeah. As the record states, the SCP in question is an extra-dimensional forested area that exhibits numerous anomalous qualities, including a hazardous phenomenon of sorts. It is accessed by performing a ritual in the woods where you need to speak carefully, where a well then emerges and a path appears that guides you to the area that SCP-4000 exists within. This unnamed world does not adhere to the constraints of any linear space, and a variety of anomalous entities native to this nameless habitat have since been documented, and many of these monsters appear as quasi-humanoid entities with abnormal limbs, often displaying themselves behind the dense trees that occur in the forest. In truth, essentially SCP-4000 is what we would refer to as the Fae. You see, for those of you familiar with some of the founding headcanon of the SCP Foundation, as outlined in SCP-001 The Factory, before the Foundation were fully established, they were at war with a species of creatures known as the Fae, who were eventually all but wiped out during the Factory siege. You see, whatever weapon unmade them, it didn't actually destroy them entirely, but instead it banished them to this strange, bizarre, and terrifying glen that shall otherwise remain unnamed. Now, if you ever find yourself trapped in this Fae and under the threat of these anomalous creatures, remember 4 things. 1. Don't call anything by a consistent name, and 2. Don't answer to any consistent name. Names are powerful things, and if your name becomes someone else's, who's to say what else is theirs? 3. Always accept their gifts, but do not consume their gifts, and 4. If a ghost tell you it isn't a creature of the Fae, obey it. And yeah, I think that should be about it. I think. What if I forget, like I'm forgetting something, I think. Kicking off at number 5, SCP-2490. Now, whilst it is certain that there are literally thousands upon thousands of vile and terrifying creatures lurking in the confines of the SCP Foundation, thankfully for us there are also a whole host of brave and capable personnel trying their utmost to keep them all at bay. For fans of the Foundation, then I'm sure you'll all be aware of the many mobile task forces that have since been detailed, who make up incredibly capable special forces that specialise in these anomalous entities and risk their life, limb and their own sanity in battling the forces of cosmic evil. But this entry, 2490, yeah, this one has something to say about that, essentially subverting the safety of what a mobile task force is meant to deliver, and instead hope to high heaven that will never be stalked by this horrifying hunter. That's only if you work in the SCP Foundation, though, by the way, civilians, so yeah, you've got other stuff to worry about. As the record states, SCP-2490 refers to a modified human being believed to previously have been Chaos Insurgency Special Operative Alpha-19, who has long since stalked countless Foundation employees throughout the 20th century. The thing is though, 2490's head is composed of a single oblong beige capsule, of which 2 eyes have been painted with no other facial features being present. As it approaches its victims, 2490 is reported to scuttle toward them like a crab, reportedly without moving its legs. And once it locks onto its victims, there is no turning back, as once it's locked in, it drills into the target's skull, leaving behind small puncture marks as it drains fragments of their brain tissue and cerebral cortex, replacing them with the same strange liquid that it secretes. Following an attack, SCP-2490 will also disappear into thin air, taking with it a random SCP that it previously worked with, where the both of them seemingly just vanish from existence, before it appears again to hunt its next target later. Why? No one has any idea, but once it locks on, and a horrifying pill-headed shaped humanoid drains your brain matter. No thank you. It's a good job that I don't work for the Foundation anymore.
Coming in at number 4, SCP-3389. SCP-3389 is a man-made lake located in the northeastern United States near the town of blank, Pennsylvania. Any human being entering SCP-3389 will, after a variable amount of time, not exceeding 10 minutes, be pulled beneath the surface of the water regardless of the depth at which they were standing. A few minutes after being submerged, a statue of the subject's exact likeness will rise from the water in their place. These statues are unremarkable beyond their anomalous origin, consisting of a synthetic resin and concrete mixture and giving color by standard household latex paint. Upon discovery by the Foundation, there were at least 47 of these statues scattered around the lake, all in various states of decay. 13 currently remain, including that of a Dr. Blank. It is currently unknown how many instances are present prior to containment. Speaking of containment, all building, private and public land in a 10-kilometer radius around SCP-3389 have been purchased by the Foundation and designated Provisional Site 91. All roads and pedestrian pathways leading to the SCP are to be cordoned off and maintain a patrol of armed guards. An electrified chain link fence topped with barbed wire has been erected in the immediate vicinity surrounding 3389. 8 guard towers, each occupied by no less than 2 armed Foundation personnel and equipped with security cameras, have been erected to watch over the SCP at all times. Back to the statue though, if any instances of the statue's collapse, personnel stationed in the surrounding guard towers are to terminate any emerging statues instantly. No entities emerging from the lake are to reach beyond the chain link fence. If any personnel are apprehended by an instance of SCP-3389, every attempt is to be made to terminate them before they can be pulled into the water. Coming in at number 3, SCP-4217. 4217 refers to both the Bismarck, an anomalous German battleship sunk in 1941, and the large cephalopod organism that is fused to the inside of its hull. SCP-4217-B possesses a pair of octopoid eyes which protrude from the base of SCP-4217-A's superstructure, and 12 100 to 200 meter long muscular hydrostats that extend from an opening in the stern. Now, aside from the presence of SCP-4217-B, SCP-4217-A shows no signs whatsoever of damage sustained from battle or subsequent decades submerged underwater. B seemingly operates A's systems. This includes its full armament of 8 main guns, 44 secondary guns, and 12 anti-aircraft guns. B also can operate A's propellers to reach speeds approaching 40 knots, but only while surfaced. This is way too much power for a creature to have and could be incredibly detrimental if you piss it off. While submerged, SCP-4217 achieves locomotion via ejection of water from B's body cavity. Typically, this SCP remains submerged at a depth of 500 to 1100 meters, navigating its territory. However, the SCP will periodically surface and enter a hostile state. During this period, it will seek and attack non-threatening targets. Now, Foundation naval forces are to patrol the SCP's territory with 3 or more battleships under the guise of the British Royal Navy. During a hostile state, naval forces are to engage with the SCP until it reverts to a passive state. Survivors from civilian vessels attacked by the SCP are to be recovered and processed in accordance with maritime disinformation protocols. Coming in at number 2, SCP-1128. SCP-1128 is an entity that manifests as a massive aquatic predator to anyone given a full description of the being's appearance through either spoken, written descriptions, or visual depictions of the being. Persons infected by SCP-1128 will initially exhibit no abnormal behavior, though some cases show a general aversion to activities involving bodily immersion in water such as bathing or swimming. Should subjects become fully immersed in water, they will disappear completely under the surface of the water, regardless of the water's actual depth. In most cases, they will reappear moments later in a panicked state and frantically try to leave the water. However, in other cases, the water will become polluted with blood and debris, confirmed to be the remains of the subject. That sucks. The subjects that reappear intact claim that they were transported to a vast ocean where they were pursued by SCP-1128. Interviews with the surviving subjects carry further contamination, as descriptions of the being's appearance trigger further infections. Yikes. Written description or imagery of the SCP's appearance or videos of the entity breaching found outside of the Foundation are to be destroyed, and Class C amnestics are to be administered to anyone exposed to such information or showing signs of the SCP's contamination. A written description of the entity's appearance is to be kept at site blank for experimental purposes only and is not to be read by anyone other than D-Class used for testing. If exposed, staff are to report immediately for administration of Class C amnestics. And finally, coming in at number 1, SCP-3000. SCP-3000 is a massive aquatic serpentine entity strongly resembling a giant moray eel. The exact length of 3000 is impossible to determine, however it is believed to be somewhere around 600 and 900 kilometers, with the head of SCP-3000 measuring roughly 2.5 meters in diameter, and sections of the body proper being around 10 meters in diameter. Yeah, horrifying. Now, 3000 is typically a sedentary creature, only moving its head in response to certain stimuli or during feeding. The majority of its body is located around the Ganges fan and rarely moves at all. SCP-3000 is carnivorous and despite its sedentary nature is capable of moving quickly to dispatch prey, aka us if we were ever to encounter it. Despite its size, it is believed that SCP-3000 does not require sustenance to maintain its biological functions, aka it kills for the hell of it. When 3000 consumes prey, a thin layer of viscous, dark grey substance classified as Y909 is excreted from its skin, with the end result of its digestive processes currently unknown. In some historical records, Dr. Eugene Getz reports on SCP-3000, I quote, "The unease was felt throughout the entire crew as we descended on that first night. Whether this was due to our uncertainty at what we would discover or something more sinister, I would not speculate. At around 0940 hours, we first observed the head of the entity. The unease was palpable now. Several other crew members complained of feeling hazy and of being uncertain what they were supposed to be doing. When we were within 50 meters, the entity turned slowly to look at us. Even now, as I recall watching this thing coil around in the darkness, I can still hear Williams barking like a mad dog in the rear of the vessel, screaming and flailing, shouting about how he could see it in his head. Frightening stuff. The area containing SCP-3000, currently a region of the Bay Beguile, roughly 300 kilometers in diameter, is to be routinely patrolled by Foundation naval vessels. Under no circumstances are civilians allowed to attempt deep-sea exploration or diving efforts in the quarantined area. Individuals believed to have contacted SCP-3000 are to be contained, quarantined, and processed at Site-151. Sadly, there is currently no known cure for exposure to 3000. As such, affected individuals should be contained and quarantined for further evaluation. Awful.